Chapter 40. Shacking Up in Style. Deborah always talked about camping out. Well, maybe not lately. But my idea of camping has always been prompt room service in a good hotel. As a kid, I did have 2 away at camp experiences. One at Boy Scout camp, and they were miserable. We never had a real honeymoon, and for years, either we couldn't afford to go anywhere, or I was too busy working. But we had some memorable hotel experiences. For some reason, the first that comes to mind is when we abandoned our rented car in a cow pasture in Martha's Vineyard, where we'd inadvertently left our motel window screens unfastened, and were eaten alive all night by mosquitoes as big as your fist, devouring our transient flesh. We'd been in Boston for a wedding after a cross-country train trip with our 3 kids and 13 pieces of luggage, and were on our way to New York and Washington before heading home to L.A. The Martha's Vineyard airport was somewhat remote, and after I got lost, nobody we asked had the vaguest idea of where it was or how to reach it. They were all tourists like us, I guess. We blundered around on some back roads for a while, preoccupied with how much time we had before we missed our only flight. And finally, I recognized what appeared to be the airport, such as it was, in the distance. But from where we were, I saw no possible way to reach it. I pulled into the middle of a pasture and left the keys in the ignition, and we stumbled hurriedly through what the girls delicately referred to as a minefield of cowpuckies. The 13 pieces of luggage distributed more or less evenly among the 5 of us. We caught the flight, breathless by the skin of our teeth. In New York, I felt somewhat sheepish as I approached the car rental counter in the airport lobby to report the abandoned car. The young woman behind the counter was unimpressed. "This happens all the time," she says. "Don't worry about it. We'll take care of everything." The LC was an old, rather small hotel in New York on 54th Street that my boss, Howie Horwitz, had recommended. It was notable not for its decor or service, or even convenience, but for an intimate establishment of the lobby, the Monkey Bar. Because the kids were with us, Deborah and I had little opportunity to see for ourselves, but passing by, one could hear the gaiety. Her vision was still quite good then, and Deborah spent a lot of time in New York museums and gallery hopping with my fun-loving cousin Georgia, while the kids and I went sightseeing. We took the obligatory boat ride around Manhattan, went to Radio City Music Hall. I furtively filmed the stage show from the balcony with my Super 8. Craned our necks at the Empire State Building, the UN, and the Statue of Liberty, and window shopped at the outlandishly expensive stores on Fifth Avenue. I missed being with Deborah, and my girls were restless for a change, and kept asking the inevitable question, "Dad, are we there yet?" Hoping for a specific destination, while I had made a point of not responding with another of the family's classic questions. "Are we having fun yet?" The suite we occupied was rather dismal and dark. In order to photograph the city streets, I had to lean far out of the living room window, while Deborah clutched at an arm or a leg to steady me. Needless to say, that Super 8 footage is somewhat shaky. The first time I visited the Muscular Dystrophy Association headquarters in New York, I stayed in a 4th-floor room at the Americana Hotel opposite their office building. I spent most of my time there viewing tapes of past Jerry Lewis Labor Day telethons and trying to sleep while the night-long traffic noises raged in the street below. I learned to request rooms much higher up, where the sound was tolerable. During more than 30 years as a producer, I was involved with filming in L.A., San Francisco, Houston, Dallas, St. Louis, Brooklyn, New York, Washington, D.C., Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Las Vegas, New Orleans, Boston, and in Hawaii and New Zealand. Deborah almost always traveled with me, and our hotel experiences were rich and varied. I'm usually content with a working toilet and some kind of view, and of course, room service. Deborah's begun to outgrow it, but she used to be uncomfortable in blue rooms, and we often asked to be moved. We stayed at the venerable Wyndham Hotel for several days while I was producing a TV movie adaptation of Pete Hamill's book The Gift in Brooklyn. where there were no hotels that could accommodate an entire rambunctious film crew. We commuted early every morning and late every night. The weather was cold. The LA crew coughed and sneezed. There was just time to grab a bite, glance at the next day's production schedule, and fall into bed. You could tell the New York and LA crew members apart, aside from the coughing and sneezing, because the New Yorkers wore t-shirts and light windbreakers and tried to keep from laughing at the LA contingent, who were all bundled up in bulky layers against the cold. We all worked our butts off, and some caught pneumonia. When Pete saw a rough cut of the film, which, not incidentally, starred Julie Harris and Glenn Ford and featured a new young actor, Kevin Bacon, he removed his name from the credits. We had to make some script changes to satisfy the network and casting people, and they did not satisfy Pete. Regardless, the producers won a coveted Humanitas Award nomination, and I sent Pete a note of congratulations, to which he never replied. Critic Judith Christ named the gift one of the best TV movies of the year. I'll never forget scouting locations with Pete in his native Brooklyn. Seeing how welcomed he was by everyone, they called out to him on the street, particularly the old-timers, and joining him for a drink one morning at the Irish pub he used to rescue his father from. He showed us the rooftops, where boys flew pigeons where he was a kid, and introduced us to elderly friends 3 flights up who still lived in the apartments he'd known as a child. Some had never bothered to travel across the narrow expanse of the river to visit Manhattan. Why, they asked. What for? After the first season of the TV series Longstreet, the star, James Francis, his wife, Kitty, film director William Wellman's daughter, Deborah, and I went to New York. Jim and I were there to try to salvage another year for the show. We stayed at the Regency and frolicked in corridors at night, after discouraging meetings in ABC executive suites, stealing leftovers from room service trays, and indulging in raucous food fights. Maybe if the network brass had been able to loosen up a little, our show would have been renewed. Jim's birthday was the same as Deborah's, day and date. When Longstreet was canceled, Jim, Kitty, and I went to Vegas to commiserate. By then, Deborah had had her fill of the 3 of us. We stayed at the Old Frontier Hotel where they felt comfortable. Kitty spent most of the time in their room, at night, while Jim gambled. I knew a little about gambling, but I watched Jim blow a lot of money at the craps table and was unable to stop him. Actually, I felt foolish trying, like an overprotective Jewish father. When Kitty and Jim tried to give me a tennis lesson the next day, I can honestly say I disgraced myself. I was the supervising producer during one season of Magnum P.I. and spent 1 week out of each month at the Colony Surf Hotel in Oahu, where the series was filmed on location. We had a lovely ocean view suite, but it also served as an auxiliary office and was usually full of writers, cast, or various production personnel. Deborah had breakfast with me one morning in the coffee shop with Magnum star Tom Selleck. As the tourists swarmed around our table like sandflies, if they'd known where to look, they could have found Tom playing baseball every Sunday morning with the crew at a local park, where he enjoyed his anonymity. During the filming of the CBS pilot, Welcome to Paradise, later near Paia and Russell in New Zealand's Bay of Islands, Deborah and I stayed for several days in a clean but modest motel which had a few hangers and no drawers for our clothes. The woman who ran the place thought Deborah was impudent for asking, but she finally came up with a small, well-worn chest from somewhere. Sorry, she said, no extra hangers, and she called Deborah a spoiled brat, much to her annoyance. The town was not without its charm, but the owners of the local deli had never heard of bagels. We completed shooting the pilot in Auckland, and during a break, I was invited to a high school competition of chest-thumping, hakas, Maori chants, which for me was one of the highlights of the trip. Another was sumptuous hengi, or luau, hosted by the family of one of our local cast members. The Maori culture was in the process of being revitalized, particularly by young people. Once, between assignments, I sent a white limo for Deborah and surprised her with a birthday weekend at the New Otani Hotel in Los Angeles' Little Tokyo, where our living room was American and our bedroom and bath Japanese. It was like an appetizer for our full-course trip to visit Kazuko in Japan. On our second motor coach tour of Europe, where we upgraded to a magnificent lakeside hotel in Lucerne because the original hotel was overbooked, Deborah luxuriated in the hotel suite while I took a solitary walking tour of the streets of beautiful Lucerne and enjoyed a boat ride on the lake. I found an expensive jewelry store. It's not hard to find one in Lucerne, where I bought Deborah a gold braille watch. Later, when a cruise line upgraded us, we met a somewhat older couple who had the cabin next door, Stan and Shirley Erdingen. They were seasoned travelers and delightful companions. Shirley was a semi-pro jazz singer and entertained one night at a passenger talent event in the showroom. She knocked everybody's socks off. Of course, I never knew who upgraded us or why, but I'd like to say thank you for bringing us to the Erdingens. We spent a memorable weekend in Palm Springs with the kids and Joan Jack, Deborah's maid of honor, who was staying with us between marriages. The entire town was full, but we managed to find rooms at a disreputable-looking place out in the desert. Although the parking lot was empty, that should have told us something, we took a chance anyway, and the all-purpose bellhop, Murphy, registered us and showed us to our rooms. The hotel was bare and desolate, under repair and undoubtedly in bankruptcy, or a mafia front. Of course, there was no active dining room. We ate out while we were there, and to pass the time, Joan and Melissa, her goddaughter, ran through the place with crayons, decorating the cheap prints on the walls with hats, mustaches, and big smiling faces. Murphy had to know it was us. We were the only guests in the place, but he never said a word. I believe we tipped him lavishly. We used to visit Rancho La Puerta on the Mexican border and Tecate every year or so. There's a Tecate on both sides of the border. When we first started going, it was a ramshackle collection of adobe buildings with a swimming pool and a beauty spa. You were expected to eat healthful vegetarian food. There was a lot of cheating, and exercise with enthusiasm. Now, we understand there are at least 2 pools, more luxurious accommodations, and tennis, and it's no longer affordable. One Thanksgiving, we impulsively decided to spend the holiday at the ranch. We piled into the station wagon with our 3 kids, my Aunt Maggie, she was still Sel to them, and my sister-in-law's niece, Terry. 3 of the kids were crammed into the rear-facing throw-up seat, which was hardly suitable, even for short trips. We were looking forward to Thanksgiving dinner, even if it only consisted of tofu, turkey, but found when we arrived that dinner had been served at lunchtime. We spent a miserable, cold, wet night in a roomy cottage that was vacant only because hardly anyone was at the ranch on Thanksgiving weekend. Aunt Sel was particularly uncomfortable, but there was more to come. Next morning, we headed home, stopping in San Diego on the spur of the moment as a special treat to make up for the previous day's fiasco. The kids were hungry for Thanksgiving dinner, so we checked into a hotel that had a highly recommended restaurant. Dinner was excellent, but the rooms were shared. The only ones available also shared a bathroom that had a door missing. We spent another restless and unexpectedly intimate night. A week later, Deborah ignored the whole occasion as if it had never happened and cooked her traditional, sumptuous Thanksgiving dinner without a hint of tofu. Everyone dug in, with no regard for the calendar. We were scouring locations for Longstreet, and New Orleans was booked solid. We found bare-bones motel rooms far outside of town, and they were awful. I complained bitterly during the entire time, tongue for the most part in cheek. However, my production manager, Nick Anderson, took me very seriously. When we returned with the cast and crew later, I saw that Nick had booked me and Deborah into the Richelieu Hotel in the French Quarter. Very charming and picturesque. A coincidence? Richelieu is a family name of Deb's. We had a luxurious 2-bedroom suite, complete with kitchen and sauna. It turned out to be one of the city's best-known party suites. Nick knew that, I'm sure, but he neglected to mention it. Many of the LA crew quickly zeroed in on some pretty telephone operators, and at night our kitchen was filled with people cooking and flirting. Another coincidence, we discovered my maiden Aunt Xel was vacationing at the same hotel, and she joined the fun with energy and enthusiasm that belied her 60-plus years. A red-haired member of the crew temporarily adopted her, escorting her around the quarter, and she loved it. There were identical hot dog pushcarts with colorful umbrellas on practically every corner of the French Quarter. They must have been very profitable for their owner, and he must have had important connections to have thus cornered the hot dog market. Red had connections too, and when I said I needed one of the carts on the Paramount lot so we could tie it into the actual New Orleans locations, he made arrangements to ship one out to L.A. I never asked how he managed it. We had a grand time in New Orleans and in our hotel suite, except one night when Deborah and I began to fade and wanted to turn in. It was hard to evacuate the revelers, especially the amorous couple who discovered the sauna and made it their own. When we filmed a TV movie, The Gathering 2, in Portsmouth and Boston for CBS, we stayed at the best Portsmouth had to offer then, the Holiday Inn, across the hall from one of the stars, Ephraim Zimbalist, whom I'd worked with 20 years earlier on 77 Sunset Strip. And at the Parker House in Boston, not far from my brother's old law office at 11 Beacon Street. Visiting our various locations, Deborah became friendly with some of the local Teamsters. The Boston Teamsters local was notorious. Several of their members and officers had been in jail or were on their way. One night, when we were filming late, I noticed one of the drivers, muscular and lean, with walrus mustache and a wicked gleam in his eye, lounging on the hood of a car, chatting with Deborah. I figured if he was coming on to her and I said something, he could get me in deep trouble with his union. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt and stayed silent. Later, on the way back to the hotel, I asked Deb what was going on. She lowered her voice so our driver wouldn't hear and whispered, "Carl said that he liked us. If we ever wanted anyone taken care of, all we had to do was give him a name and a city on a piece of paper and $20, and no questions would be asked." She started to laugh nervously while the Teamster driver eyed us in the rearview mirror. "Carl was just kidding," I said, but I suddenly realized that for a moment I'd actually thought of a couple names. In 1973 and 1979, we lived for several weeks in Vegas at the Sahara Hotel, where I was producing the Jerry Lewis Labor Day telethons. One day, Deborah encountered a would-be burglar when he tried to break into our ground floor suite. She slammed the door and called hotel security. They found he was carrying a gun and credited Deborah with nailing the elusive thief they'd been trying to locate for days. During the pre-production for the telethons, we sometimes traveled with Jerry and his entourage. On one occasion, we were scheduled to film at Houston's Astro World. We'd been invited to stay at the hotel and visit Judge Hofheinz, the guiding force behind the entire enterprise, in his Astrodome box to watch the Astros play baseball. The judge was a semi-invalid then, shrunken in a wheelchair, but he must have once really been something to have accomplished what he did. Local dignitaries shared the elaborate box with us, drinking and helping themselves to extravagant amounts of food, and the next box were visiting Russian cosmonauts. After the game, an aide to the judge gave us a tour through the inner walls of the dome, which housed offices and lavish guest suites in secretive concrete splendor. The accommodations at the hotel were astonishing. We had the entire penthouse floor, accessible only by a private elevator and a key card. It consisted of several suites of rooms, each decorated differently and beautifully furnished. Our suite had a circus motif. At one time, the judge had owned the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. We slept in a circus wagon bed, and there was one step up to the bathroom throne. For several minutes after we arrived, we were in and out of each other's rooms, comparing notes. The penthouse contained a full-size professional kitchen and a nightclub that looked like a stadium, with a baseball diamond painted on the floor. The facility was apparently designed for corporate meetings, but the whole place was empty except for us. All 8 of us. In Jerry's suite, there was a massive king-size bed and a large fish pond, and the separate, ornate dining room boasted a table that seated 12. While we were there, the management couldn't have been more gracious, and we were treated like visiting royalty. They provided us with impeccable service, every amenity, and masses of food. Once, Deborah and Patty Lewis had lunch alone at one end of a big table, served by 4 attentive waiters. And once, we spotted an enormous silver tray on the table, piled high with jumbo shrimp, carefully arranged around a gleaming bowl of cocktail sauce. It had been thoughtfully and artistically prepared for us, and Jerry pointedly ignored it. Then, we asked him about it later. He replied blithely that he wasn't hungry. While Jerry was touring the amusement park earlier, he'd stopped for a favorite snack, a couple of hot dogs.